While the death of a player character in a tabletop role playing game is never anything to make fun of, and always something to consider how your players will react should this very happen, it's also a tabletop role playing game. And while somebody might get emotionally invested in a player character and become upset over the death of a player character, and that is something that we have to sort of eventually confront, maybe as DMs, and the best way to deal with the situation. Also, it's not real. It's a tabletop role playing game. And no matter how much emotionally invested a player might be in that character, at the end of the day, it's not real. Doesn't matter. Though it might trigger some memory of, grandpa's death or some tragic event, and the player character might get wrapped into, some emotional baggage that they have, and it might cause a situation that you as the DM have to sort of figure out how to deal with, even though you probably don't have the proper training to deal with somebody who's going through an emotional crisis because of the death of the character. Again, it's a game. And because it's a game, the death on the great scale of things doesn't really matter, because much like in comic books, player characters rarely stay dead. Especially in Dungeons & Dragons. Especially in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. But the topic du jour of the past couple days has been death in D&D. Specifically, there's two major humbugs rolling around the interweb about death in D&D. One seems to be that players are seeking heroic deaths for their characters and going out of their way to be almost chaotic stupid to try and get their characters killed in the attempt to have a heroic cinematic death. And the other was that apparently somebody ran a game and somehow a player character died, and it was like their first or second game, and they got really upset about it, and then maybe the DM didn't handle it very well. And so it brings, again, the revolving topic of how do you handle death in a tabletop role-playing game, and how do you handle death in D&D? Because unlike many other tabletop role-playing games, with the exceptions of maybe superheroes and some type of super science role-playing game, death in D&D, especially in 5th edition D&D, is kind of more like the common cold. It's, especially now in 5th, it's very hard to die in 5th edition. In fact, 5th edition is sort of designed to keep your character alive, even in ridiculously situations, because of this whole experience. Player characters dying, the lack of ability for a player to control that situation, in Dungeons & Dragons drifting more and more towards storytelling and drifting less and less away from just the more combat aspect. There are sort of this ingrained idea that it is very difficult to kill a player character, and it is very difficult to keep a player character dead. Even a first level player character in Dungeons & Dragons gets to take advantage of the short rest and long rest ability, has a lot of hit points, usually a decent armor class. There's probably at least one healer in the party, and you get the 3 death saves at 0, all of which can be circumvented if somebody just walks by and stabilizes your wounds, or if you roll a natural 20. So even if somehow you manage to fail the death saves, nobody is around to stabilize your wounds, and the cleric doesn't take the 5 extra seconds to cast Healing Word to stabilize you, and you do actually die. Unless you really want that character to stay dead, the ability to come back from the dead, especially in 5th edition, which again is pretty difficult, is relatively easy and available to you. I mean, there are multiple ways for a character to come back alive. And there's multiple ways to make a player remain active in the game should the impossible happen. We've gone over this before in a previous vlog, that, maybe take a break, allow everybody to sort of deal with the situation, see how the player is reacting to the death of their character, if they're fine with it, or if they're having an emotional break. And then, allow them a chance once the game restarts to maybe bring in a second character. Oh yeah, Bill the Torchbearer, he was in the back the whole time. You could play him. Play an NPC that they rescue, or best of all, my favorite, is if the player doesn't have a character to play and you're not in a situation where you could bring that character back to life, and they want to keep playing, though, let them play the bad guys. Makes your job easier. It gives them a chance to be still involved in the game, and maybe it gives them a chance to go, oh yeah, I'm going to kill the fuck out of Tim and Susan's characters if I'm playing the bad guys. So the two things. One, heroic death. Players going out of their way to seek heroic deaths in Dungeons & Dragons. Where does this come from? Obviously, it comes from Critical Role. God fucking damn you, Critical Role. You seem to find a new way to ruin the hobby every week. So because there has been this, cinematic, heroic, deeply emotional deaths of player characters in Critical Role and shows like Critical Role, it sort of seems to be influencing people who are wanting their characters to go out and seek heroic deaths. Why the fuck would you want to seek out a heroic death? Your whole point is to stay alive as long as you can so you can enjoy the fruits of the labor of adventuring. If the very first thing out of the gate you're like, yeah, Crom, I want a heroic death. No, even Conan or Bolvi or some super berserker isn't actively seeking a heroic death. They know if they die heroically, they will be rewarded in Valhalla, but it's not like they wake up in the morning going, today I want to die. No, it's like, yes, let's go, and I'm going to go, and I'm going to embrace the day, and I'm going to have a glorious combat, and if it is a good day to die, it is a good day to die, and I know I will die heroically and go to Valhalla. But they don't actively seek it, and the trouble with players that are actively seeking heroic deaths or chaotic, stupid deaths, and I've been in multiple situations, especially in 5th edition. In fact, I will once again state that I have seen more stupid players and more murder hobos and more people going out to be chaotic stupid and trying to get their characters and the fellow party members killed in 5th edition than I have in any other version of the game that I've ever played, and I've been playing for a very long time. When you have these players who want to seek out these heroic deaths, they're going to drag the rest of the party with them. Or they're going to place themselves in a situation where suddenly they realize they are totally outnumbered, totally out of situation. And yeah, you actually can die. And this isn't a heroic death. You're just going to die stupid. More often than not, when Jace the dwarf goes wandering off down the hallway the opposite direction of everybody else is going because it's what his character would do and he wants to seek a heroic death, and he triggers the encounter with a Hydra that we would not have had otherwise. And not only does he get his character heroically killed, he gets the rest of us killed. There's nothing heroic about that. It was just being chaotic stupid because you wanted to, grab the attention. There's no heroic death. There's no noble death. You don't, as House said, you don't die heroically. You don't die nobly. You live heroically and you live nobly. But death is usually pretty ugly and pretty lonely, and it doesn't, if you've gone out of your way to get your character killed because you thought you were going to have this heroic Critical Role death, again, it's a game, and chances are not only was your death not heroic but stupid, but you got the rest of the party killed. So do not go out of your way in Dungeons & Dragons to seek a heroic death because, again, it's really hard to die in 5th edition D&D, and it's really hard to stay dead in 5th edition D&D. Live a heroic life. Live your character as a glorious, heroic individual. Be a hero. Embrace the day. That's the life you want. And if by some impossible means your character does die, you died because you were living a heroic life. You were living a noble life. You were living an honorable life. You were being a hero. And through your actions and really bad dice rolls and the fact that nobody else in the party bothered to stabilize you or the cleric didn't cast Healing Word, you died. But again, this is 5th edition D&D we're talking about. We're not talking about other games. Even if you die in 5th edition, even if you somehow manage to fail all 3 death saves, you can come back. It is really easy to come back, which again makes the point of a heroic death pointless because all I got to do, raise dead, breath of life, resurrection, reincarnation, animate dead, wish, miracle, healing potion, regeneration. There's whatever. Unless you want the character to stay dead, the party or the DM will find a way to bring you back to life. Now, the other one we're talking about, of course, is this situation where somebody was playing a game, and I guess it was their first or second game, and somehow their character died. Again, 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons is not geared towards that mentality anymore. The very, Wizards of the Coast and all the players have said, and if you look at the way 5th edition is designed, unless you're playing hardcore alternate rules, 5th edition is designed to keep your character alive, because carrying a character takes agency away from a player, and that's something 5th edition doesn't want anymore. We don't want to take the agency away from players. That's something they keep saying. We don't want to place players in a situation where they're completely out of control and they can't play their character. Because that upsets them and that triggers them, and that death might trigger them or upset them or cause the game to come to a crash. 5th edition is designed to keep you alive. So if somehow that character died in their first or second game, probably the DM was doing something wrong, and probably the player was doing something wrong, or they just didn't understand that in 5th edition, even at first level, the steps you would have to take to kill somebody and get them to stay dead are almost not worth the amount of energy. Just play the game, and if bad things happen, bad things happen. But again, remember, it doesn't matter because it's just a game. If you want the character to come back, even if it's first level, they're probably going to find a way to bring you back. There's also ways you can play other characters. You can play the NPC, you can play somebody that you rescue, and hey, as my favorite, let them play the bad guys. And if it does seem that they're emotionally upset, well, you're not a professional. You're not a psychologist. You're not an attorney. The best thing you could do is take a break and talk to them as a friend if that's something that's really emotionally disturbed them. But remember, again, you're not a psychologist. You're not, unless you are, but you're not trained to deal in these situations. So you should, understand that if the best thing is to take a break, take a break. But if the player wants to keep going, give them an ability to keep going. You don't know how to judge the scene. But if the situation was that the DM wasn't really in a position where they knew how to deal with the thing and the guy got killed, or the guy got killed in his very first game, I don't know. Just sort of envision and envelop them, get them to remain connected to the game, and give them a reason to keep playing. The last thing you want them is to walk away and go, God damn, I fucking hate this. If they got upset, appreciate that they're upset. Let them deal with that upsetness. But remember, you're not a trained psychologist. It's not your job to deal with their emotional baggage. Just talk to them like a friend. If you need to take a break for the game, take a break for the game. If you need to keep the game, keep going. And everybody's like, let's keep going. You take a 5-minute, let's get a snack, let's take a smoke. And then you come back and you're like, dude, your character's dead. But, if you want, there's ways to bring them back. And until then, do you want to play an NPC? Bob the Torchbearer. Do you want to play the monsters? When in doubt, let them play the bad guys. So, yeah, this idea of seeking these critical role, heroic deaths for your character because you want this big cinematic death like you saw on YouTube, it's not going to happen. And at best case scenario, you're going to piss everybody else off at the table. So just play a heroic, noble, honorable character. And if something happens, something happens. But remember, in 5th edition, the chances of dying are really difficult. The chances of staying dead are really difficult. Now, again, we're talking about 5th edition. We're not talking about other games or death. We're just talking about this 5th edition thing. And if worse comes to worse, take a break, come back to the table, see what everybody wants to do, and then let the guy whose character died play the bad guys. But in the end, I understand you're upset about your character, but stop comparing yourself to what you saw on Critical Role. The reason why this guy got upset that his character died in the first game was because of Critical Role. And that's it, because my phone's